everybody, and welcome to this live talk today on the topic of legal design and contracts. Could it become a requirement in the United States? This is exactly what we're going to talk about with my guest. We're going to talk, to be more specific, about these terms of service, Labeling, Design, and Readability Act, the TLDR, which would require websites and online service to provide an easily digestible summary of their terms and conditions without the legalese. And so if you're interested in the topic, make sure to stay and to tell your colleagues and your friends, because you're about to meet my guest who's going to talk to you about this act, what it means if you're a lawyer, if you're a legal designer, and also how you could get to design those engaging, understandable contracts. My guest is the founder of Legal Agency and Counsel Collective. He's a legal designer, he's a lawyer, he's a contract simplifier, and he's all about simplifying legal ops and legal docs. His name is Marty Finestone, and he's going to be there with me to talk to you about this act and what it means to you. So let's get started.
Inequalities will came from
Hi, Marty. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I figured after that hype video, that hype music, I got to make a little intro.
This is so cool. Welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, what you
Sure. Yeah, so you gave a nice little overview, but given today's topic, I'm going to have to confess. So I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing technology and commercial law since 2007. So I've been the bad guy writing so many of these too long, no one's going to read terms of service, privacy policies, and all of those. I'll call that before I was enlightened by contract design theory and doing things better, making it understandable, simple. So I guess I'm a recovering or a reforming commercial contracts lawyer. I'm up in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, which we've got some snow back there, as you can see in my backyard. I run Legal Adjacency, which is my own consultancy focusing on simplifying contracts, legal documents, and legal operations. So that's me.
This is so great. Thank you for being here. So tell us a little bit. You got to discover recently this new act, the TLDR. Would you like to tell us briefly what is this act all about?
Sure. So I came across it just sort of in my reading and travels, and it's gotten some media coverage. And it's a bill. So right now it's just been presented in the U.S., I'll say Congress. I'm in Canada, so I have a little bit of an idea of their legislative process, but I don't pretend to understand it. But it's got bipartisan support, so that's a big thing, especially these days where you don't see the two parties coming together on much. So the fact that you have representatives from two parties coming together pushing this act, which is at its heart, it's going to require the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, and that's the body that regulates trade and competition for consumers in the U.S. So the FTC would come in, create rules mandating that websites have to offer an easily digestible summary of the terms of service, and that's without the legalese. So it's going to, so it mandates that the FTC is going to regulate it, so it gives it some teeth, but then that this sort of summary has to be there, and the summary is there for the sake of transparency. So it has to have whether the data the company collects is necessary to provide the service. If it's not, then they still have to disclose what they're doing it for and what they're using it. It has to have a graphic diagram of how the consumer's data is going to be shared with third parties, and give consumers instructions on how they could delete their data, or at least warning them that if they're unable to delete it, as well as it goes into some of the liabilities and that a consumer has to use the service. So what rights they're giving up to their content, is there mandatory arbitration, are they waiving class action? And then also the companies have to list any data breaches they've had in the last 3 years. It's not, as it's currently drafted, it's not going to apply to all websites, all apps. It's those that are in the broadly commercial nature, and it's going to exempt a bunch of small businesses. But that said, it's going to really push for this change, for this of transparency. And as I said, it has some teeth to it. So it's got an enforcement side. Any violation of the law, if it's passed how it is, would actually get qualified as within the realm of unfair and deceptive under the U.S. Federal Trade Commission Act. And so when that happens, the FTC has the authority to act on it, but it also gives states the power to do some things themselves. And so the attorney generals could actually launch civil action against companies that violate the act. So that would be in not making things transparent. The practices that they do that are made transparent, that's a whole different story. And actually, I want to bring up something a little interesting that I came across. So shortly after this bill was brought out, there was a research poll done by Politico and Morning and Consulting, and they found that the act is supported by more than 80% of respondents, so of consumers, and that includes a strong majority from both parties. And I have here that data. I'm just going to bring that up to show everyone. So if we look at this, there's a lot of support, especially you could see very strong both parties. And what's interesting also in this, they found that, yeah, most people don't read or rarely read these terms of services documents. Yeah. But now with this TLDR Act, so to bring in better transparency, better design, there's that desire to, the public wants that change.
So this is really interesting. So the act has some specific requirements. It has not been passed yet, but it has been proposed. So in your opinion, and from the research you have done, Marty, why this act and why now? What's the problem it's trying to address?
Yeah. So let's put this in it's coming out of the context of there's growing momentum in Washington for the legislation to actually force digital service providers, especially in social media platforms, to be more transparent about their practices, including around data collection. And a lot of that is coming, and the momentum's gaining from the testimony that Frances Haugen, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, or Hogan, who was the Facebook whistleblower who testified back in the fall around the research, even that sort of Facebook's data practices, its dark pattern work, and even some of the internal research they had that they know how their products could harm users. So that's a big part of the push for this. And in the broader context, there's a sort of a push in Washington, or at least I as a sort of on the other side of the border Canadian observer see this, that you've got this growing push back against big tech, and that would be your FANGs, or I guess now it's MANGs. So FANG is the acronym for sort of like the big four, big five of was Facebook, now Meta, Amazon, Apple, Google, Netflix, and pushing back against them. But another reason why it was introduced that, so one of the lead sponsors of the bill, her name is Lori Trahan, and she's a representative of the House of Congress. And she said her view is that companies are exploiting the fact that most people skip over the terms. And they do that to then bring them into these one-sided unilateral agreements. And then that way people are exposing more and giving up more personal information and data than they'd really want to if this was all made clear to them. So she said the service agreements are a really convoluted way to obfuscate and make it hard to strip away consumer rights and their ability to make informed decisions. So this is sort of a pushback against that.
Really interesting. I see we have some attendees on the live. We have Joseph. Thanks, Joseph, for tuning in from the UK. We have Elizabeth Distadler all the way from South Africa. Sunashi is here with us from Mexico. I'm sure there's more live attendees. Let us know where in the world you're tuning in from, and let us know if you have any questions or comments for Marty. It will be amazing.
Especially if you're in the U.S., because here we are. We're all non-Americans here. Although I do think as a Canadian, I bring an interesting perspective to this because we consume a lot of the same media in Canada that the U.S. does. We kind of use the term could pass for Americans in a lot of way, or present as Americans in a lot of way if we keep our mouths shut. But at the same time, Canada is very different, and it takes a very different approach in terms of constitutional matters, in terms of rights, in terms of privacy, the division of powers between the federal government and the provinces versus the U.S. from the sort of federal powers there in the States. And so I think kind of bring an interesting outside but close to the border view to all this, where get to have a little bit of objectivity, but at the same time close enough that, we see what's there and kind of know what goes on the ground. If anyone has any questions, throw them our way, or especially America, I'd love to know sort of that perspective we saw from that survey data of sort of what the, I assume it's sort of, a telephone poll, or if it was Politico, maybe it was online. And so the regular user base might feel. So
thank you, Marty, for bringing this. And I see that Elizabeth says she loved the name of the legislation.
Yes.
TLDR. Elizabeth is the funny one in the room, so please be active in the chat and let's have some fun together.
Yeah. So for
the name of the act.
Yeah. So for those who don't know the acronym, TLDR, outside of the act's name, means too long didn't read, and it kind of came out of Reddit, but it's used in internet speak where something's just too long. Give me a summary, or as we say, explain it to me like I'm 5. So that's another sort of Reddit thing. But the act, it's nice to see that legislators have a little bit of a sense of humor and use the acronym TLDR to explain one where terms of service are really too long and no one's reading them. But what I love about it, though, is the D. It stands for design. So here we are as legal designers. So, we kind of mentioned that it understands there's a design aspect to this. And I think that's huge.
So tell us a little bit about that. This is the most interesting part.
Yes.
Because this is how you get to implement, if this act were to be adopted, this would be how you would implement to be compliant, right? So tell us a little bit what you would do to make this act, to make a digital contract compliant should this law be adopted.
So one thing to keep in mind is that this is just about relaying information. It's not changing the content. It's not changing sort of what many of us feel are the bad or egregious practices that you could see from data collection, that you could see from terms of service. It may not change the convoluted wording in the terms of service. All it calls for is that summary up front of that information. But there's a lot more that could be done. And what I think is exciting here is that it's still going to cause many companies to go take a look at their terms of service. And you put that in the spirit of the growing legal design, push for plain language and legal writing, all this momentum of clearer contracts that's going on in circles. I'm not going to say it's not even academic circles, but in practice that's out there. And we're seeing more and more, and lawyers are pushing for this too. So it's not just those who are sort of one step removed from the legal writing process. So you have that momentum pushing for this change and making things simple, making things more accessible. So this is going to make what's in it transparent. Great. So, it enumerates what you have to say and what's in there. That could still be done, but it has to be done in a plain way, in a easy to understand way. So at least that can't be legalese. Great. That's step one. So you got to brush up on your plain language skills to put that information in there. I could see, unfortunately, maybe there'll be some shenanigans where this chart's going to be in tiny little font and it's not going to be in a way that's going to be easily readable. The language may work, but it's going to be might be, for some bad actors, sort of stretched in a way where it's hard to read. And so you may still be compliant, but that said, you kind of still make it hard. So you're being transparent, but not easy to get to that transparency. So we'll see. So the FTC still has to make rules around this. So there's still this layer to come to see how this actually is going to shake out. That said, coming back to my point about how this is going to hopefully bring some change into the content, that's what excites me. So I'll pause there and say, no one thinks or expects this to be a panacea or a silver bullet and fix everything wrong that's wrong with terms and conditions or data practice or overreach. Even the backers of this, the sponsors of this legislation, acknowledge that. They know it's not going to change things. They kind of say, look, at least here that, there has to be that other action for antitrust. There has to be other action for privacy, transparency, and changing the unilateral nature of this. But at least here with this, consumers are going to know what they're getting into before they go to a website or download an app. And maybe that's going to nudge the change. But so we've got that nudge because you're going to start to see people understand or have access to saying like, I don't like this crap, but I got no choice. So they're still going to accept it. They know it's bad, but they're going to accept it anyways, but maybe start to grumble about it. But another interesting piece in the legislation is it wants everything to be accessible for, and this was interesting wording. It's about research and study of the terms of service. And so it wants to facilitate independent oversight and study of terms of service contracts, including the data collection, and I'm reading from the legislation, legal abilities and data sharing with third parties. So it doesn't just want it to be transparent, but it wants that to be studied and observed. I'm not sure what that means. And there isn't really, I haven't come across anything to get around that. But what we could at least hope is that study is going to create momentum, further momentum, where further empirical evidence showing why change has to happen in the areas that this is not covering. So, lots there. But coming back to your question, how would I implement it if this was here today? Well, start with a good summary. My advice would also be to look at the content and look at the practices and really start to get serious about changing them, because there's some things that are being done, call it automatically or by habit, by companies. They gather data, they ask for data. Some don't don't use it. They don't even know why they ask it, but they're following a template. They're following a model. Especially, and you see this in terms of service, because terms of service globally are sort of copying the U.S. approach that U.S. providers take. But the U.S. law is a little complicated. It has little segments all over the place. You have case law, you got 50 states, each does their own thing. So, not that I get, but that's one reason why you have these terms of services so long, because there's so much of wanting to cover one's own behind that lawyers feel compelled to have and put in. And there's so much there that needs to be covered to cover their behind from a risk allocation perspective, or maybe not need, but want to cover, that you get these long documents. They don't need to be so long because you could still address the issues, but do it in a much more transparent, user-friendly way. So that's where we get into how legal design and contract design could actually help do a lot of that. Yeah.
This is fantastic. We have also such a great engagement from the audience.
Awesome.
So let's take a look here, some questions and comments. And don't hesitate to keep asking questions and keep commenting and sharing new insights.
Yeah. But it's not Stump Marty Day. So.
Marco here says that's such a great topic. He was not aware of it at all. And he also, like me, loves your background.
I hope it's not distracting. It's just, it helps give me light on the side of the room. So, yeah.
Elizabeth de Stadler from South Africa says she agrees. Once you make it clear about what you're doing, CEOs go like, wait, what? Are we really doing this? And then they make changes. And she says she's seen this so many times. Bianca says, too long, didn't read Act. So laughing icons, emoji. And actually the terms is just one page. Yasmin is tuning in live and excited for this combo. Bianca is sharing the act, I believe. So this is so nice of you. Joseph says he loves that this design approach is being brought into the focus. Do you think there will be a need of FTC guidance on what good looks like? Really good question. E.g., plain language, measurables, readable standards. Could there be some kind of subjectivity when it comes to enforcement? This is such a great question. What do you think, Marty?
Well, I guess there's best hope. So there is a plain language in government act in the US. So there's already been some legislative thinking there in terms of what plain language is, and that's to deliver service within government. That's my understanding. I could be a little wrong there, but I'd like to think I'm right. And so I think you would see some looking to, and there's been chance for review, there's been chance for criticism, commentary for that. So that would be a great starting point in terms of what plain language or easy to understand is. But there is the danger that it gets a little more subjective than objective. But I think there's enough academia, enough study and standard out there that something could come up. But Joseph raises a really interesting point about enforcement. So enforcement, I think, is only going to be as good as the resources that the FTC has. I read somewhere that they have basically something like 8% of the people compared to what the UK has when it comes to privacy enforcement. And you have a lot more people in the US than you do in the UK. So you have less people working on the enforcement side for a greater population and a greater instances of practice. So if there isn't going to be any additional funds coming into the FTC to grow their enforcement branch, it's great that there's the legislation, but the practical on the ground is not much is going to change because enforcement's not going to happen. So that's one downside when it comes. So there's still. Yeah, there's still a lot of, call it risks or pitfalls that could happen, but it's a nice step in the direction. It brings, it's not trying to be all things to all people.
So on that line of thought, are there any standards? Elizabeth is asking.
Yeah, so there's an ISO standard there, and then there's also, you even have like the I forget the acronym. So there's organizations have standards. So there's a lot that could be pulled from, but we run the risk that these sources aren't going to be used. So there's always that. So we'll have to see how this all shakes out. Yeah.
This is so interesting. And I want to thank you for bringing all of this up and sharing with this amazing community on our social media and website. There was a question about privacy, but I'll keep that one for later.
Okay.
Another question from Joseph. Does this mean legal design is going to become mainstream? And also, do we need to wait for an act to be adopted to actually provide a summary and use legal design?
I'm going to answer the second part of that first. No, you don't need to wait. It's always better. In fact, it's good for business to be cutting edge. It gives you a competitive advantage because you could say, hey, even before this was a law, we were doing this. We were transparent. We were making things clear. We were giving you, consumer, a better experience. So right there's a business and a business advantage from the consumers being happier, less friction for the service. Maybe they'll sign up faster. There's the marketing advantage that you get to stake that claim out there. And also, if you have a better terms of service that actually reflects what you're doing on the back end, you may actually have an easier internalized process. So there's a lot of compelling business reasons to do this. So there's absolutely no reason to wait. And in fact, now where we're so many brands are trying to position themselves as being communities, and they talk about communities. That's sort of like a hot trend in marketing. Well, if you're a community, that means you're together with your consumer base. How could you be together with them if you have a very unilateral, convoluted set of terms of service and data privacy practices? So you kind of have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And this is and using contract design principles is an avenue to do that. Coming back to the first part of that question, I'd love just a reminder on it because, I just want to make sure I remember it right. Yeah.
I love the answer. You do not need to wait for this
Yeah.
act to actually provide a summary, to make information more transparent. And I love the arguments you bring, Marty. I think this is really smart also to be able to provide in a more clear manner what you do, which also helps clarify what's happening in the back end as well. And as Elizabeth was saying, sometimes like you don't even know what's happening in the back end. And so it's a great way to get to involve not just the legal department, but other departments and get them to work together and to break the silos and to like what's happening and how can we help marketing, IT, technologists, and how can we understand better what's really happening so we can make it more clear for the consumer, increase trust by increasing transparency. The first question I asked was, in this two-part question, was, is legal design going to become mainstream? And also, I mean, how would you actually do it? You already mentioned it. Can you clarify the step-by-step process? Where would you start? And so there's again two questions here.
So legal design, I think, is going to definitely become much more accepted, used, mainstream. I hope so. I think, if we think legal design, kind of add on the word that's missing there, legal design thinking. Well, if we look at design thinking, it was nowhere 15, 20 years ago. Now it's everywhere within business units. So I think there's certainly, when legal design's got a great opportunity to use the full words, legal design thinking, to talk the same language as other groups do, that other business units, product development groups are doing. Just coming back to sort of that second part is, by having great terms of service that are user-centric, you're putting legal as part of the customer journey map. And that's a big thing in business, is that customer journey map, getting customers on board, eliminating friction, walking them through the process. Well, why isn't legal in terms of service done that? I mean, I remember so many times when I was at my old firm, how we'd have companies call us a week or even a couple of days before they were about to launch their app or launch their website. And they're like, I need a terms of service. Like, it becomes the afterthought and they just think it's checking a box. And sadly, that's not the case, or it shouldn't be the case. I'll pause there and go to the big question, sort of, so how do we do this? So if I'm saying it's a good thing and it needs to get done, how do we do it? Well, I guess to break this down sort of step by step, we don't have time. That'd probably be a full lecture. I don't think we had the time, but I'll sort of give a quick and dirty in terms of what you do. And I'd start with what I like to call mindful drafting. And that's going to be intentional with what you're doing. So you're going to write with intention or draft with intention, and you're going to be intentional about the purpose, context, and audience of the contract. And so a bit of framework around that is you're going to do a lot of planning and information gathering. And this is, let's say you're starting from scratch. So you got to understand who the users of the product are, understand who the readers of the legal document, the contract are, and understand how best to communicate with them. So you got to find that information. You also have to understand what the bargain, the deal that the contract is documenting. Gather some information about whoever's going to live in the contract, whether they're implementing it, whether it's a user using a website or an app. You need to understand and address what do they need to know to sort of live under that. And then identify major pain points for the parties, either the parties specifically. So if it's a bilateral, like two-party contract, or you could even go general. So parties in this position, what are they, this particular type of agreement, what are their typical pain points? And then you're going to want to bring all that together and address it. And that's sort of the first part of mindful drafting, is that intention around what's the context, who's this for, who's reading it, and serving that. The second part comes down to how you write. And you're going to want to take a plain language approach here. So plain language, when it comes to legal writing that's well thought out, well organized, and it's understandable to the reader, the user, without any interpretation, without calling up the lawyer and saying, what does this mean? Or does this mean I could do this? The language is clear. The legal concepts are explained. If there's any technical or legal terms of art, they're defined or they're explained. And you want to write at a level that's understandable for the users and readers. And that's actually one mistake that's often I've seen, is that people may want to write to a certain audience, but it's not the true audience. And even you can see that in legal design where things are brought down too low of a level when it's not appropriate for an audience. And I'll come back to that point later. So that's kind of how you could go about when you're starting from scratch. It's that mindful drafting approach and taking plain language. So that's the drafting side. When it comes to more of a conveying information outside of what you're saying, it's how you say it, getting into the how. And that's where I think information design is a big area that you've got to bring into. So it's making sure that it's easy to read, easy to skim, and that helps the understanding and the accessibility of the contract. So some ways might be from your font choices. Different fonts have different connotations to them. Some are easier to read, some are harder to read. It goes to font size, how much white space you're using. It also comes down to thinking, well, would putting obligations in a chart be easier to understand than in terms of multiple clauses in a contract? Excuse me. So it's being mindful in that way. If you're looking to improve a contract, so say you have something and want to bring in legal design in terms of how to make this better, that's where you could really pull in other aspects of legal design or design thinking. That's where you get into user testing. That's where you get into research, iteration. And so when you're improving a contract, you're looking to make it better. And you're going to measure. So by doing that, you want to start by measuring what you already have. But you got to also decide, what does that better mean? So you need to talk to people who are already users of this contract. So whether it's your client and how that organization uses the contract, or their customers or their other parties, and find out what don't they like about it. Because that's what you want to make better. And so you have to understand that better. And then you have to come up with some metrics. Once you've decided what better is, some metrics to measure whether you're going to make it better when you get down to it. Once you've got those metrics, go start making it better. Do an attempt. Kind of don't be afraid to fail and take a quickened approach to it. Make that iteration better, that what you think is better, then go test it and measure it based on those metrics. Go back to your users, find new users, see where you're successful. If you're not, or you don't get the high enough metrics you want, make some refinements after you've understood why it's not working. And then that way you're making another iteration to make that improvement, trying to make it better. And then you rinse and repeat on those steps. So you're going to spend a lot of time in deciding what that better means and finding out what you need to do to fix it. Yeah. So that's if I could, go on and on in terms of how we really get into those, but I think I'll leave it at that as sort of a quick framework for how to bring legal design into contract drafting.
I loved everything about it, and took some notes to recap for the audience as well, for those of you who are visuals.
Great.
First, be intentional with your drafting. Second, use plain language to streamline your text. I liked what you said about, being intentional with your writing, and you don't always need to make it, keep it simple, stupid, but not too stupid.
Yeah.
Use information design is number 3. 4, use a test. 5, use metrics. There's 2 5s here. 6, iterate. 7, what did you say? I think 7, you said. I love that.
Well, it was kind of like
back to the user's point of view. That is actually 7, and 8, repeat the steps. So it's actually, it sounds like a mindful drafting. Elizabeth says, yes.
Yeah.
This is great, mindful drafting. 2 questions. Does this mean this is taking a lot of time? Like if you have a situation where, like you have said, you have a client calling you next week, we're launching the app, we forgot about the terms of use. Can you please draft terms of use for us? Can you do this in 1 week, all of this?
Likely not, because but that's part of the constraints that you're going to have to work under, is decide what could you actually get in to make it better. So if I was given that like 1 week, 2 weeks to go, I'm realistic that I'm not going to get access to the people to find out in the different areas, really talk to them about what's going to happen. What I can do is, if I'm not going to be able to address all the pain points, if I'm not going to be able to talk to the client and counsel them around certain practices that aren't necessarily, call them best for business in the agreement, I could at least write them better. So I could at least, from the mindful drafting approach, use better language choice, keep things simple, the understanding. So it could really be that part. Maybe I'll have time to do some charts or some better explanations, but I'm not going to have time to really get into the information gathering, the information finding, and the user testing and iteration. Those are the things I'm not going to, unfortunately, have time for. But the content, I could at least with one go do the best I can and make it as simple and clear as possible, and avoid redundancy, avoid confusion, and most importantly, insist the client that they give me, like, I at least could interview them to find out what they understand is happening, so I could make sure the terms of service reflect what they're doing, at least at that point in time. Often when it's launched, so they're going to iterate, they're going to test, they're going to pivot. And so it's kind of, would hope that 6 months down the line, or a year, sort of once they've got to, let's say, 2.0 of whatever it is, or 3.0, we got to revisit it. And then take the time to actually do that improvement, make it better based on what a discussion of better is. But when I've got a week, it all comes down to good drafting and good writing from a plain language standpoint, and trying to give suggestions for how the information could be better presented. Because in a firm, often we're just sending a Word document over, and then it gets put up on the website based on either the website's design template, or it's just going to be small font. So it's sort of insisting not to do things the typical way. Yeah.
Love that. So to recap what you have said, and I love that, if you have time, do the user research, talk to your clients, try to talk to users to understand the frictions when they access the terms of use. If you don't have time, then just stick to mindful drafting, and you can always revisit later down the line once you have collected the insights from the users. This is really, really nice.
Yeah, either way, it's still going to be better than just taking a template. It's still going to be better than presenting legalese. It's still going to be, so yeah, see, someone agrees with me. It's still going to be a lot better than if you just sort of went to the typical grab it someone else's or a precedent terms of service and changing around the terms and adding some, customizing it where it needs to for the actual solution. But it's doing what you can to make it clear. And that's still so much better than what we see today out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about the advantages of using this approach. So it may take more time. So it would be interesting for you to share what are the potential benefits or proven benefits. And before you tell us, Elizabeth says she calls this MacGyvering.
MacGyvering, yeah.
I loved it. Does MacGyver, didn't he has a shirt like yours, Marty? I think so.
Well,
I don't remember, but it could be. It could be. Are you the MacGyver of legal design too?
Sure. I'm using rubber band and chewing gum to fix contracts. Yeah.
Really systematic and structured approach. Of course, often there will be user insights that can be gathered via the marketing and the UX team that can be really useful.
Yeah.
And there's always something you can do. So let's say MacGyving, this is Marco, I think. MacGyving is the best quote of the day. Yeah, legal design MacGyving. This is great. He does wear t-shirts like that. Exactly. We'll have
that's what. Yeah.
We'll make a little meme of that with you, Marty.
Yeah.
But before, tell us a little bit. Let's go back to a serious aspect. So legal design may take a little bit more time. What are the benefits of having digital contracts that is streamlined, using plain language? Some visual elements, like you had said, doing all of this work of testing, iterating. I mean, why not just use a template? What are the tangible benefits of this?
Well, it's kind of, I'm going to link it to what I said earlier, where I'm going to go on a tangent. I'll come back to this. But my tangent is talked about how there's so much focus on customer journey, and design thinking. You see this in other business units. And so legal is kind of separated from that. But this is a great opportunity. And Elizabeth raises that legal design should educate marketing, should educate user experience first. So they're going to push internally over to legal departments or to their external service providers to make these changes. And often that's going to then educate the CFO or the COO, because so coming back to my private practice days, when I was working for companies, if it wasn't in-house who was giving us direction, most often legal was dealt with either by the head of marketing or the COO or the CFO. They were sort of the go-between for legal wrangling with outside. And so this is just, so if they're not the ones who have time or maybe not the interest to be educated, but marketing does. And that's where it should happen. So the benefits that marketing should understand is that it actually pulls in legal and terms of service into the customer journey. So it allows what's in the contract and the contracting process to reflect all the hard work they're doing. It could reflect the brand, the values, and the messaging that a company's doing. Because especially in the B2B, so business to business context, if companies saying, hey, we're easy to work with, we're friendly, we love our customers, but then your contract, your terms of service is completely one-sided, it's convoluted, customers have no rights. Well, there's a mismatch there. So you avoid that disconnect. You're also going to make things a lot easier. If you have an easier to understand terms of service, and this is kind of what the TLDR Act is doing, it may not be great, but at least people, if it's easier to read, they might read it and understand going into how little bargaining power they have, or how little, or where their rights are, whatever they are. And so it'll make the medicine go down a little easier, perhaps, and avoid a dispute because they already know what's going to get into. You avoid those surprises later on. Coming into contracts in general, when you have easier to understand, easier to read, more accessible contracts that actually address the needs of the people living under them, you're going to avoid disputes. So your legal costs go down. You're going, not just legal costs, but think about all the time that you spend on dealing with disagreements or trying to placate customers or satisfy customers, dealing with misunderstandings, all those emails from the different business units, and how much even just the legal department's time is being spent there, and put that into, a dollar amount. I mean, it's going to be tens of thousands in every organization. So you're going to save resources. You're going to free up more time for things. And more likely if you have an easier to understand contract, it's going to get negotiated quicker, signed quicker, money's going to get in the door faster. So you're driving revenue faster. So just thinking in sort of those commercial terms of it's great for business should be enough.
Yeah, totally. This is really, really amazing. So from what I understand, it's totally worth the investment of time because of all of the positive effects that it's going to bring. It's going to be more better workflows, a better customer experience, a better understanding also between departments, the legal departments, the marketing, the UX team, which is designing the app. And I think finally, we can all be on the same page. And I think this is fantastic. But on this journey to...
You're also going to have, sorry if I could jump in, happier employees, because they're not dealing with as many problems. They're not coming to work and dealing with negative things. They can focus on positive things. Obviously it's not going to make all the problems in the workplace go away, but when you're not saying our customers hate us because they didn't understand the contract, you then you're adding that positivity, that sort of a better place, a better mindset in the workplace. So that too.
Yeah, I love that. And I have a difficult question, because all of this looks really appealing, at least to me, but there must be some pitfalls to avoid, mistakes that may be commonly made when we try to design a contract in such a way. Would you like to talk briefly about some of the most important mistakes to avoid when starting or running such a project?
First thing, as a practitioner, you got to read the room, in the sense of know your client and and what's going on and what their expectations are. work towards those, then start to help them expand to sort of bring in all the changes. And I think so. That's one mistake you could make, is not reading the room and saying, oh, we're going to change all this, do this, without even finding out, does that work there, or have they even tried that in the past? So it's just sort of, common service provider mistake to avoid that. Another is not knowing the audience of the contract. So I talked about this earlier, how, I'll give an example. I could bring up a comic book contract I've done. So I'm just going to share my screen for a second here and show that. There we go. Now we'll go. So go over here. So this is a comic book contract, which is, in this scenario, it was a release from employees to be able to use their image and likeness from an employee event and social media. So it's asking permission to and asking the employee to give rights and waive rights in favor of the company. And so this could work where you have sort of call it lower skill workforce, or a workforce, or even forget about skill, just a workforce that you want to make it more engaging and more fun to read. But this wouldn't work in a B2B commercial context. So you wouldn't want to use that kind of contract for a B2B audience, for example, or you wouldn't want to use that in if your customers are in a very conservative industry. So you kind of have to match your design, your visual layout and your wording to the audience. Don't make that mistake. Another pitfall is biting off more than you could chew. So you kind of have to understand your time and your resources, what you'll be able to do in working with the organization, because you may not be able to do all the wonderful things that you can do using legal design skills, or do all those steps. And we talked about that earlier in the example of, what if I only got a week before the client needs to get this out? So it's understand the context of what you're working in and the limitations you have. And I think also another mistake is relying too much on your assumptions and not testing your assumptions. That's a big one. And they know what they say about, assumptions. So, yeah.
So since I love those points. So reading the room, in other words, it's doing it with the right client and in the right context. Getting creative is good, but maybe, being mindful of how much creativity you can use. It can be highly relevant. The comic contract you have showed us, I think it's fantastic. For companies that are in the creativity industry, I think it's just fantastic. But for a company that is doing oil and gas, not sure. I mean, unless you do it for the creative people in the oil and gas. But since you're the MacGyver, and I want to share something that is gonna, I hope you're gonna like this. I just created this really quickly. Can I share this, Marty?
Okay.
I hope you're gonna like this. So since Marty is the MacGyver of legal design, what are your tools and secrets?
Yes. Like to share with us? One of my favorite tools these days is this 11 by 17 graph paper I've been using. So I use some high tech, but also low tech. I just love the size of the paper, that it gives me space to do diagrams and write things and to connect a lot of dots. So that's one of the things I use, but you could do a lot with just Microsoft Word. So you could, in terms of font choices, in terms of layout, you kind of forget that when we have other tools. I do like Canva. I'm just going to show, let me find it here, where to go. All right, I'll share my whole screen. So right here. So this, if you could see this document, I have this mega checklist of simplified words and phrases. And so, this is done in Word, but it looks really nice. And then also, this was done in part Canva and in part Word, but this is talking about contract design. It's an ebook that I have, a mini ebook on contract design. So you could do a lot in Word. When it comes to the design part, Canva is great for getting visuals quickly using templates. There's a lot in the Adobe Creative Suite. For user testing, I like card-based survey tools. So that's where rather than getting a whole long survey, you get one question per page and the user clicks through it. That way, it's just they focus on just what's in front of them. They don't get distracted by other questions. I personally use JotForm. I use that tool because you get encrypt data. So you could actually encrypt the response. So we talked about privacy, big thing. That's big for me and my client base. But you could also use Google Forms, SurveyMonkey. Video chats are great if you can't get in the room with the person, but even if you could, record it, because that allows you to be present in the moment of this discussion when you're interviewing a user about what you're trying to improve. So you don't have to worry about jotting down notes, and that way you're going to be actively listening to their answers and ask more meaningful and helpful follow-up questions. Coming back to low-tech things, I love sticky notes, whiteboards. I also keep around in my pocket, this is a bit high tech, a little digital audio recorder. So when I'm on about, inevitably my mind's going to start thinking subconsciously or even sometimes consciously on things I'm working on and ideas. And I want to get those down as quickly as I can before I forget them, because I know how my memory works. So I have this little pocket-sized recorder and I just pull it out, speak my notes, gets it out of my brain really quickly, so I don't have to sort of try and let written words interfere with what I'm getting out. And I just keep that and then go on with my day. When it comes to writing, another a big help for me, tools I love are editing tools, particularly those that are meant for lawyers. I use WordRake, so that's WordRake, BriefCatch, and Perfect-It. They all do slightly different things, but they help me quickly edit and simplify my writing. So they're time savers, but they're also like a second set of eyes on what I'm writing. And what's important, why I use those are they run locally on your computer. They're not cloud-based. So for me as a lawyer, from a client confidentiality and just general from a data security standpoint, that's really important that there isn't analytics in the cloud. I'm not worried about data breaches when that's happening. We talk about practices, are they matching up? So those are some of the big tools I have. In terms of some things that helped me get here, I've got I got a few books. So that I still refer to even as I go. So I always have by my desk my Oxford thesaurus. So that's sort of a critical thing for me. Highly recommend this book by Brian. Oh, it's reversed. So Legal Writing in Plain English, and that's by Brian Garner. The second edition. I also really like the book, The Secret of the Highly Creative Thinker. So a lot of great notes in there. If you're doing workshops and user testing, this is a great one to help you understand there. So it's How to Design and Teach Workshops that Work Every Time. It's the Workshop Survival Guide. That's by Rob Fitzpatrick and Devin Hunt. This one, just back to the creative mind, that's by Dorte Nielsen and Sarah Thurber. Always keep this with me, the Design Thinking Toolbox. So it's a great list of resources for different exercises, whether you're in the ideation stage or the user testing stage. And then a manual of style for contract drafting by Ken Adams. Really, really great book. So those are sort of from the books. Those are some of the books I recommend, and those are some of the tools I use in my work. Yeah.
Really, really fantastic. Thank you for sharing all those great resources. I hope the audience is taking notes, because you've been sharing so much great, valuable insights. We also got to receive a confirmation just today via all of those social media. Let me just try to share this confirmation. Let me try to share this and stay with us. We are almost about to wrap up. But we just got confirmation that Mike Guyver is using the same shirt as Marty. Or Marty is using the same shirt as Mike Guyver. So
Buffalo plaid. Yeah.
So that is now confirmed.
Okay.
So you officially the Mike Guyver.
Not fake news.
Fine. Congrats. Standing ovation.
I like that.
what is your next step, Marty? And how can we help you?
Sure. So, well, first I'll offer to help or put something out there for anyone. So I have, as I mentioned, this mini ebook on contract design. So it kind of gets into explaining what contract design is. It's got a whole list of my thinking around contract design, some of the arguments for using it, for using legal design and simplified writing when it comes to contracts. So that may help someone make a business case for that. But there's also a whole bunch of resources in terms of how you could go about getting some training, or the books I showed, amongst others. Of course, Legal Creatives, great place to learn about contract design and get legal design certification. If you want to, and always if you want to, just ask me questions. So here's how you could find me. So just send me a DM or an email. There's the address of Marty at legaladjacency.com. And I'd be happy to get you a copy of my mini ebook on me. I've got a newsletter called With Less. You could sign up for that at withless.legal. And that's meant for legal departments and those who work sort of really close together with business units, if you're in private practice, to how to bring a more creative approach to your practice, but then also to a lot of here's what's going on in the world as it relates to in-house lawyers, legal operations, legal technology, substantive news updates. That goes out every Wednesday. That's a free newsletter. So you could sign up for that at withless.legal. I'm on Instagram. I know I say Twitter there. I don't really do much there. So, but Instagram at himarty.f. And actually, I am a fan of vinyl records and a collector. If you're into music and vinyl records, you can follow my vinyl account at for the record Marty, and there's a period in between each word. So that's for.the.record.marty on Instagram, and I share what I have in my collection. So that's in terms of how I could help and how people could get in touch with me. In terms of my next steps, I'm always looking to help those who are interested in terms of bringing, simplifying their contracts and improving the accessibility and the language in their contracts. But I might as well, if you allow me, I'm going to put a plug for a project of mine that is coming very, very soon, which is Counsel Collective. So Counsel Collective is a bit of a different approach. It's not contract design. It's a lively virtual co-working community for lawyers who are working remotely all around the world. And so it's a virtual co-working experience to help lawyers ditch loneliness, get rid of anxiety or reduce anxiety and the lack of focus and productivity that come from working from home. So it's through co-working, which is really kind of you work alongside people on video in the virtual sense. So you don't have to work alone. You don't have to feel that you work alone. So you get the benefits of working from home, but you don't have to no longer feel isolated, lack social connection through the day, lacked human connection. Hi. So Counsel Collective ends all that. And so I want to plug that. I like to say we're for lawyers who want to work independently, but not alone. And then there's also a community hub where people could post questions and resources, and the community could come together and help and support each other in a whole bunch of different ways. So that is launching next week. So at counselcollective.co, you could sign up right now to get on the wait list, but we're opening up the doors next week. That'll be early next week for subscribers. So I'm really happy about that because we've been in beta testing for about a month and a half, and now the doors are just about ready to be open. So that's kind of my next big thing, in a way, is getting that off the ground, because, and the reason why I'm doing Counsel Collective is so I like many people working from home at home in pandemic. I run my own consultancy. Before that, I was working at a big firm, and I'd be able to knock on people's doors, go down the hall if I needed that little social burst, or if I needed to bounce an idea off of someone. I don't get that being on my own. When in the before times, I would work in coffee shops, or I'd work in lobbies of co-working places that had coffee shops or libraries, places I knew I'd run into people, because I love that just sort of random collision, that burst of spontaneous interaction with people. And I missed it and I craved it. And I kind of but there's a lot of pluses for working from home. So I kind of looked to this virtual co-working model as a way to bring back that human connection in my day. And I know there's lots of others like me who like working from home, but it's not perfect for them because we miss that interaction. And there's sometimes where you just don't have the focus or the energy to work, but by working alongside others, you get that accountability. You get some focus, and you could build a routine in your schedule for the time to do these things. Yeah.
Wow, this is great. So lots of resource available in this snowy courtyard in Canada with Marty Finestone. You can connect. Marty just gave you his contact information, and here they are once again. So make sure to connect with Marty to continue this conversation. Yep, this is it. Great. And so before we go, I wanted to thank you so much, Marty, for sharing with the audience about this really amazing topic. There was one last question we didn't get to cover, but briefly, there was a question, and then we're going to wrap up because we already more than 60 minutes. It was Joseph who asked a question, and I think this can be a great way to open and close at the same time. Do you think, given the context and focus on privacy and users, this could be the first step for the US towards creating a federal privacy law?
Probably not. I think this is separate from that. What's a little timely. So within the last 2 weeks, the Uniform Law Conference in the US is recommending to create sort of a model privacy framework that each state would then adopt. So because they realize it's going to be so hard or take so long for there ever be federal privacy legislation in the US. So it may come down to this sort of uniform state approach. So I think that may end up being a little more likely than what you'll see at a federal level. But as I said, I'm not a US lawyer. I'm not in the States. I'm not a US sort of privacy I don't have sort of advocate. I would love to know what people at Epic or what they think. So that's the electronic, or EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and others think in terms of that. But that's my personal quick take.
Yes, this is useful. Thank you for sharing. I mean, it's a difficult topic, but it's great to see that there are steps that are being taken to increase transparency and improve understandability of legal information in the context of digital websites and apps. I mean, there's been many stories around this topic with Apple and the iTunes Store and the new digital privacy labs that gives you some kind of information as to how your data is being used, although it's not perfect, but it's a step in this direction. And we see around the world. Last week we spoke with Joseph about this, so feel free to connect with Joseph Stoker as well, and to watch the replay of the live talk we did with him. And eventually we should maybe put all of those live on one single page on legalcreative.com, so you can catch up with those great lives, because Joseph did talk a lot about privacy and how there's going to be a huge change in the way we collect data, use data for marketing and advertising, and it's already changing, but it's just the beginning of big changes. So really interesting things to watch. Before we go, I would like to again thank Marty, and also use this opportunity to invite the audience to join the next event, because we're going to have another event similar to this one, but on a different topic. So let me just show you that next week on Tuesday, Marco Mendola from the UK, who was here with us live. Maybe Marco, you're still with us. Well, next week he's going to be in the studio with me, and he's going to talk about how he got to design differently a contract. It's actually an online, I think it's online privacy or online terms of use. So you're going to be able to see a tangible example of what you could do applying this methodology that we call legal design to contracts. So I highly, highly, highly encourage you to come back next week on Tuesday. Also, we have another amazing event coming up on Saturday, February the 12th. It's the Virtual Legal Design Gallery. I'm so excited for this event. We do this every 3 months to showcase the work that is being done inside the Legal Creatives Academy, which is a digital platform where you can learn legal design. And we love to showcase the work that is being produced by the members, and also to bring experts to have incredible discussions and share insights. So make sure to join as well for the art gallery. I believe you should have here the link for you to register to this event, the Virtual Legal Design Gallery on Contract Design.
I'll be
And
there.
last but not least, you do not need to wait for next week, or you do not need to wait for Marty to come back on the show to interact with him. You can also connect with this beautiful community in the Legal Creatives Community Hub. You're inside this community, and I think this is where we got to see your contract design document is there too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would like to invite you to join this community hub where you can share a lot about so many things. And so do not hesitate to come in the community as well. Any last words you would like to share with us, Marty?
No, just thanks so much for this wonderful conversation. I mean, it's really important. I'm sure people could tell from how I advocate for it that there, as I said, I'm a reformed contract drafter. I things can and should be better in terms of drafting. And so I'd love that this is one step forward towards that. And as I said in the beginning, I love that there's the D in there, means design, because design's about more accessibility, about it's that human and user-centric approach to making things better. And so, yeah, let's do that.
This is great. Thank you so much, Marty.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being live. Make sure before you go to share this live on your feed for your colleagues to be able to learn about the Act. Too long didn't read, TLDR. Make sure also to tell your colleagues and friends about what's happening in this space, because this is not just exciting, but this is also very impactful, and it really is a big game changer as to how we do things in law using this methodology. And last but not least, I'm gonna leave you all on a little jingle that announces what you're gonna see next Saturday for the event at the Legal Design Art Gallery, where we're gonna have members of the community at Legal Creatives who took the challenge to show the contracts they have designed using new tools and techniques. So make sure to come for the event. It's a great way for you to network, for you to see what's happening, and for you to be part of this really exciting movement. Thank you once again, Marty. And let's stay in touch. And I can't wait for the Counsel Collective opening, and for everything else that you're doing that is so amazing.
Thanks so much.